Shakespeare wrote three different types of plays. He wrote comedies, tragedies and histories. So when we're talking about different styles, we're talking about the term genre. And what we're going to focus on today is this notion of Shakespearean comedy and what are the main features, the distinctive features of a comedy play. And Shakespeare's comedies are concerned with celebrating life. And they explore our follies, our weakness, the silly things we do. We laugh at the experiences and inexperiences that we have in love, and the plays provide a social message, and there are ideas in there that we're meant to, it's meant to make us a bit wiser. We have a light-hearted look at ourselves and use it as a way of just learning a little bit. Now, within the genre of comedy, there are different types of comedy, and it's very apparent that when you look at the tragedy plays, there are elements of comedy in that, and certainly history plays have comedy and tragic elements as well. Now, when we look at the genre of comedy, we can see that there are different types. So the play As You Like It, for example, is primarily focused on relationships and love and marriage. So it's defined as a romantic comedy, whereas a play like The Tempest, which is concerned more about power and leadership, but it has a romantic aspect to it, and the play ends with a marriage, but it is determined or defined as a tragicomedy. We don't need to get caught up in that, but it's interesting to look at the different types that there are. So let's have a look at some of the comedy plays, the features of a comedy play. So first of all, what Shakespeare does is he sets them in an unfamiliar place. So they're not set in England, they're set on an island, or they're set in an imaginary place. Quite often it was fashionable to set them in places like Italy, which was a fashionable place to live at the time in the 1600s, or sometimes they're set in ancient worlds, and so by having that separation from England, it allowed people to suspend their disbelief and see it as a bit of fun, and that just added to the effect. By setting it on an island as well, meant that the rules of normal civilised world didn't apply, and certainly in an imaginary place you can see that being separated. The plays generally have a focus on relationships and love, and quite often they'll end with a marriage or multiple marriages. And really what the plays are meant to be, the comedy plays are meant to be a celebration of life. And you can see that there is a strong focus on music and song, lots of revelry and enjoyment, lots of fun that occurs. Now, when you start looking at the comedy plays, you'll find that quite often the names of certain characters are very similar, and it gets very confusing to keep track of who's who. And that's all part of the genre. So in comedy plays, quite often there will be confusions and mix-ups and mistaken identities. So people will swap roles, or they'll put themselves into a disguise, or they'll wear a mask. And there'll be balls and parties and things like that where people are encouraged to be in disguise. And so that's a very common function of a comedy play. And I've got this term here, mask, M-A-S-Q-U-E. So we've got mask, the literal mask that goes on your face, but there was a thing called a mask or a masked ball that was very popular in the court, in the monarch's court in the 1600s. And it's worthwhile just talking about a little bit, because they do occur in a number of the comedy plays. So if the monarch was going to have a masked ball, it would be a big event, and it would be a celebration in excess, that everything was overdone. So there would be elaborate costumes, lots of music and poetry and dance, lots of food, an excess of food, and it's a meant to be a huge celebration. Quite often there would be illusions created, so it would create an amazing sort of euphoric atmosphere. And certainly the idea was to have a sensory overload. You know, all of the senses were pushed to the excess, and it was a real popular endeavour, and something that people look forward to a lot in courts in 1600s. Okay, so lots of disguises occurring, mistaken identities. Lots of humour comes from that notion of people being mixed up and mistaken. Now, there is also a lot of humour created through witty banter, through puns and wordplay. You know, there are a lot of practical jokes that occur. And you'll see that there's verbal humour through puns and wordplay and things like that. There's dramatic irony, so maybe it's through characters swapping roles. The audience understands who they are, but the other characters don't understand that. And there might be slapstick humour too, that form of physical comedy where people are falling over, and you know, the humour comes from that type of thing. One thing that we can add to all this is this role of gender, and who played the female roles in Shakespeare's plays. So the female roles were generally played by young boys rather than women. Women weren't able to perform in theatre at the time, and so the younger boys would play those roles, and that added to the humour as well, because the audience was aware that it was a young boy playing a girl, and in some of the plays that girl is disguised as a boy, so you've got a boy that's being who's pretending to be a girl, who's actually literally being performed and acted by a young boy. So that all creates another layer of humour. The other thing that some plays have, and they're generally the ones that are set on an island, like The Tempest or A Midsummer Night's Dream, and that is that there will be magic, there will be potions, spells, that type of thing, and there will be spirits and fairies. So that gives you a pretty good overview of the types of conventions, the features that occur in a Shakespearean comedy. And what we'll do is we're going to apply that to the play that we're studying. And just a couple other things to keep in mind when we're talking about Shakespearean comedies is that all Shakespeare's plays have 5 acts. Comedies are no different. And you'll note that when we refer to them, we use Roman numerals. So we always have the act first, and it's in a capital, so it's Act 1. Then when we talk about the scene, because in the 5 acts they'll be made up of shorter scenes, we use lowercase Roman numerals, and then that's the lines of the actual the scene. So if you look on the right hand side of each of the page, you'll see that they're numbered, and so that indicates where we are. So if you're looking for something and you might be told that it's Act 4, Scene 2, line 121, then you know how to find it. You'll go to the Act 4, go and find the second scene, and then find the 121st line. So that's how we refer to the conventions of the acts and scenes. Now I've drawn a little diagram here to show us how the 5 acts work in the play, in a comedy. The play opens with some sort of complication. You know, the premise of the story is established, and then what we have throughout the Acts 2, 3 and 4 is what's called the rising action. So the play is building towards a climax. And you'll notice, and I've sort of tried to draw it, but the Act 3 is generally a really long act, and you know, all sorts of things are sort of developed in that act. And then when you get near the end of Act 4, or it might be at the beginning of Scene 5, but generally at the end of Act 4 is where you're going to hit that climactic moment where it's going to rise to a cathartic moment. And then what will happen is you'll have what's called the falling action. So very quickly after the climax, the narrative falls away, and we end up with the resolution right at the end of the play. And I've put there restoration. Order is restored. So you've been taken to this fictional world, and these amazing things have been going on. There's been a lot of disorder and chaos and roles reversed, but at the end of the play, everything's brought back to normal. And generally, as I said before, there will be a marriage or multiple marriages, which reinforces the values of the society. So that's the structure of the play. The other thing that we can talk about is when you look at the cast of the play, and then when you're looking at the different scenes within the acts, there will generally be a parallel plot. So you'll have a primary plot that's to do with the central characters, and that'll travel along nicely, and it'll move along. But there will be a secondary plot. So there'll be secondary characters who there's sort of two stories going on, is what I'm saying. But what happens is that the secondary plot, it normally mirrors the primary plot. And so when we watch what's occurring in this story, we learn more about the primary plot, and that's the function of it. So you'll see I've got them as if they're both travelling along like this, but as the play gets near the end, they will come together. All the characters will come together, and then the issues will be resolved. Generally speaking, but not always, the primary plot will be concerned with the elite of society. It might have to do with leadership and government in a lot of the time, or it will just occur in the court, in the realm of the aristocracy or the monarchy. And then the secondary plot is generally going to be more of a domestic scenario, and it's going to be to do with personal relationships or love, and often it will involve or entail people that are from the common, they're the commoners, they're from the lower echelons of society, or sometimes that's where the fairies, you might have a plot like A Midsummer Night's Dream, where you've got story of the aristocracy, and then you've got the fairy world, and so you've got these two stories mirroring each other. So the primary plot quite often is concerned with the public world, and then the secondary plot is more to do with the private world, the world of family and relationships and love and things like that. So when they come together, that's a nice way of tying. That's the way Shakespeare ties his ideas and reinforces the message that he's making. Anyway, that gives you a good overview, and as I said before, now we can get into the play.